And now I would like to introduce Emeritus Professor Dr. Robert Zweinenberg, recently retired Professor of Art and Science Interactions at Leiden University, the Netherlands. Robert has degrees in civil engineering and philosophy. His research and teaching have focused on the role of contemporary art in the academic and public debates on the ethical, societal, political and legal and cultural implications of biotechnological innovations. He specifically engages with a growing number of artists known as bioartists, who use the opportunities offered by the life sciences to work with new materials, living materials that traditionally do not belong to the artistic realm. He has worked closely as an academic mentor with Jacob van der Beugel, the artist whose work has been the catalyst for this symposium. Professor Robert Zweinenberg's presentation is titled The Why and the How of the Interaction Between Art and Science. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Leana. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you very clearly.
Okay. Then I'll just start my lecture. In my lecture, I want to discuss the why and the how of the interaction between art and science, and indicate which form of interaction between art and science I consider urgent and relevant. And I will explain why I think Jacob van der Beugel's work meets my conditions for what an interaction between art and science should be. Collaboration between art and science is often presented as a panacea. It's the idea that collaborations between art and science, artists and scientists, will lead to all kinds of new insights and solutions for the urgent challenges of our time. This idea is based, among other things, on the assumption that artists par excellence would be able to offer solutions to the challenges of our time, because they have always thought and made things outside the box like no other. I must confess that I'm very skeptical of these claims. Most art-science collaborations seem to involve a one-way exchange of knowledge and technology from the sciences to the arts. Artists can be so dazzled by the challenges and possibilities offered by new technologies and materials that they lose themselves in playing with the tools and materials of biotechnology, for instance, creating so-called bio-artworks, without any deep interest in or knowledge of biotechnology itself, or concerns for possible societal or ethical implications of these technologies, and often without a sustained artistic focus. And scientists often happily play along with these artists, recognizing an opportunity to improve their public image. Of course, this can lead to interesting works of art, but not or hardly to a new perspective on the problems of our times. Often, however, the works of art that arise from such collaborations, so collaboration between scientists and artists, tell me something about the implications of science that I already know, all kinds of insights, opinions, or criticism that I could also find in articles and books, often with more intellectual depth. Science always remains untouched in these collaborations. Moreover, in collaborations, there is always the danger that art is used instrumentally to celebrate or illustrate the blessings of science. Should art be one of the voices that reassures us about technological developments and solutions, and by the melding of science and artistic expression, help to ease the way to popular acceptance of new technological application? Is art that makes scientists happy good art? Should art be instrumental to the goal of disseminating science and technology? And if not, how to avoid that? Furthermore, in collaborations, certainly between artists and scientists, all kinds of hierarchical power relationships, dominant interest and stakeholders will be active, which will often turn out to the disadvantage of the artist. The artist must rely on the benevolence of the scientist for access to knowledge and materials. My skepticism raises the question, can art make a unique contribution at all to our thinking about the great challenges of our time? Can art be urgent and relevant in the public debate about the ethical, political, and cultural consequences of, for example, biotechnology? And the question that must precede this question is, should art take or be given or aspire to a role in that public debate? My answer to that question is wholeheartedly yes. Art must be one of the voices in the debate about the ethical, cultural, political, and social implications of biotechnological innovations or at any other technological innovation. To give an example, this is an article from more than 4 years ago about the possibility of growing human organs in pigs or sheep. The big advantage of this procedure is that it uses the stem cells of the person in need of a new heart, minimizing the chance of rejection. Can you give the next slide, please? It is, in fact, a copy of that person's heart. This technique would also solve the shortage of donor heart, but it raises all kinds of ethical questions. We are creating a so-called chimera, a hybrid living entity between a human and an animal. And how should we respond ethically to the fact that the species boundary between humans and animals is crossed? And that also applies to this kind of research, where brain organoids, a kind of mini alternative for human brains, are placed in a mouse to research brain diseases like Alzheimer's and Huntington's on living human brains. Research that, of course, is not possible, at least not ethically possible, on living human beings. I can see the benefits, but I also see the huge ethical and cultural concerns. It is important that we, as a society, are aware of the implications of biomedical developments. Developments in germline technology to eradicate, for instance, genetic heart defects, like in this example, through the genetic modification of human embryos, raise worrying ethical questions. The issues at stake are such an attack on established ethical and aesthetic ideas about who and what we are as humans that we need all available cultural forces, visual arts, literature, philosophy, theater, to address them. We need a new understanding of ourselves as human beings vis-a-vis these developments. An understanding that should not be guided by only those sciences themselves. So, given the profound ethical concerns and cultural challenges posed by biotechnological innovations, as well as advances in other sciences, such as artificial intelligence, the opinions agreed upon in a mutual collaboration between scientists and artists are of little use to us. What is needed is a multiplicity, a polyphony of contradictory and divergent opinions to reveal and explore and make tangible the ambiguity and complexity raised by technological innovations, to which a definite yes or no is not possible. Art is one of the cultural voices capable of this. This also means that the parameters of a debate should not be determined in advance by expert or institutionalized stakeholders. But all voices of a society should be given equal weight. Focusing on controversy around morally and technically complex problems in areas such as human embryonic stem cell research or human germline genome editing, we need to examine the interplay of science and technology with shifting notions of democracy, of religious and moral pluralism, and of public reason. Again, we need multiple voices on these issues that contradict each other, that are disturbing, in order to bring out the unresolvable complexity and ambiguity of these issues that don't allow for a simple yes or no. What does that mean for art if art wants to be one of those voices? What relationship should art look for with science if art is to make a unique and individual contribution to the public debate on the implications of, for example, biotechnological innovations? I find an answer to that question in a quote from an interview with the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze from 1968 in this French magazine, and in English translation available on this online platform. Next slide, please. This is the online platform, Diagonal Thoughts. And Deleuze says the following in this interview. And here's the quote. Next slide, please. The encounter between two disciplines doesn't take place when one begins to reflect on the other, but when one discipline realizes that it has to resolve for itself and by its own means a problem similar to the one confronted by the other. One can imagine that similar problems confront the sciences, painting, music, philosophy, literature, and cinema at different moments, on different occasions, and under different circumstances. The same tremor occurs on totally different terrain. And now follows a fragment that I will explain later, even at the risk that those answers would suggest another problem. Now, what does Deleuze say here? The encounter between two disciplines doesn't take place when one begins to reflect on the other, but when one discipline realizes that it has to resolve for itself and by its own means a problem similar to the one confronted by the other. To stay with the example of biotechnology, art should not start to reflect on biotechnology, not reflect on what is going on there. Art should not try to solve a problem of biotechnology. However, art must, for itself, so within the arts themselves, résoudre pour son compte, to solve a problem for its own sake, for the sake of art, and not for the sake of biotechnology, and with its own means. So when art deals with the problem of biotechnology, it becomes a problem of and in art. He continues with, one can imagine that similar problems confront the sciences, painting, music, philosophy, literature, and cinema at different moments, on different occasions, and under different circumstances. The same tremor occurs on totally different terrains. Now, importance in this sentence is the word tremor, in French, secousse. I think we should understand that word in its literal medico-bodily meaning, an involuntary, quivering moment, a convulsion, or a psychological shock. Secousse, tremor, refers back to the French verb secou, which I think is better translated with shake instead of confront. It is about a tremor that shakes the sciences and that shakes the arts. And if art tries to solve such a tremor, then the risk that those answers would suggest other problems exist. So art does not provide definitive answers, but more likely only new problems. So what Deleuze is saying here is that art should not collaborate or exchange. Can you go back to the other slide? That art should not collaborate or exchange with science in order to jointly find an answer to a tremor that is challenging that science, but that the artist must turn a science tremor into an art tremor, a tremor that must be solved within the arts for the sake of art itself and with its own artistic means. So the tremor becomes a challenge to the art itself and how to respond to that tremor within the arts. So in my understanding of the Deleuzian tremor, it is something that violently shakes a discipline, that disrupts the authoritative narratives, that challenge traditional ethical notions. So, for instance, human genome editing as a treatment for genetic diseases is a tremor in the Deleuzian sense within the medical domain, because it raises all kinds of unexpected medical ethical issues, as well as unexpected medical challenges. It shakes the existing authoritative or dominant narrative within the medical sciences. And that this is the case, we see in the many international conferences where experts from mainly the medical field are searching for the ethical considerations underlying genome editing research, and in particular, germline genome editing and its application, and where these experts are reflecting on clinical pathways for germline genome editing, and how to regulate this in such a way that patient safety and benefit is guaranteed. If genome editing is taken up by art as a tremor in the Deleuzian sense, then those medical practice biased issues are obviously not central. Art should not reflect on the issues that biomedical sciences have with human genome editing, but it should become a problem of the arts itself. It is a tremor in art, that is, it disrupts the authoritative or dominant narrative about art. It challenges notion of what art is or what art should look like. Now, a good example of this is, I think, Italian futurism. In the early 20th century, the tremor of the acceleration of life made possible by new technology, the invention of the car and the airplane, shocked Western culture and societies. All kinds of traditional ideas about people, about human beings, life and relationships with machines and technology were challenged. The tremor of acceleration led within the arts to new forms of art, to new form languages and to new ideas about what art is and what art should look like. And thus, futurism became one of the voices in the societal debate about the implications of these new technologies, a voice with its own unique sound and impact, a unique voice in the polyphonic choir that every society needs to face the ambiguities and complexities of our technological culture. Another example I'm thinking of is Surrealism and Dada. Both movements are fueled by the new psychoanalytical notions of their time. While rapid developments in psychotherapy were triggered by the treatment, or rather the failing medical treatment, of shell shock patients from World War I. And World War I, of course, prompted the start of Dada and Surrealism. And just as futurism became one of the cultural voices to get a grip on acceleration as a new cultural phenomenon, a tremor caused by technology. Dada and Surrealism might be considered as cultural forces in getting a grip on a totally new understanding of the human mind and psyche that started with people like Freud and that became a tremor for medical sciences and culture. And I think we can easily say that if these art movements had cooperated neatly with scientists and had not gone their own weird way, the cultural impact would not have been so significant. And this is how I also view Jacob's work. The tremor of biotechnological innovation is for Jacob a tremor for his own artistic practice. Van der Beugel's work cannot be regarded as an illustration or an explanation of biomedical issues, nor can it be viewed as criticism or enthusiasm for the medical sciences. With his work, he does not seek to approach or collaborate with the medical sciences to help solve a problem within that domain, within that medical domain. Van der Beugel takes up a tremor of the medical sciences, but he aims to investigate this tremor only within his work as an art tremor, with his own artistic means and methods. The tremor of human genome editing thus leads to a work that challenges our ideas about what sculpture or a ceramic work should be. This makes the work a challenge, the work of Jacob, for the viewer. What am I looking at? Why is this art? Why and how does this work relate to issues within biotechnology? Obviously, the work does not provide answers to these questions. On the contrary, Jacob's work demands an attentive contemplation from the viewer, an intellectual and physically open contemplation. Only then can a mutating story open up space that is not characterized by a certain experience or answer, but rather by a cloud of associations that emerge in a disorderly way and call on us not necessarily to question the subject of the work of art, but to re-examine ourselves. In such a contemplation, the work can offer space for alternative ways of being in the world. The artwork becomes a space with undefined possibilities, without predefined structures, without goals. A space where the things of the world, among them tremor of human genome editing, have the freedom to appear without any imposed structure. If we allow the work of art to open up that space for us, the work becomes one of the urgent, heterogeneous voices in the cultural and social debate about the implications of biotechnological innovations. I repeat what I said before, we cannot leave the decision about our future to science alone. The challenge they pose to our existing ethical notions are too drastic for that. We need many heterogeneous voices to find an attitude towards the ambiguities and complexities of our technological world. So to conclude, when it comes to such far-reaching technological innovations as genetic modification of human embryos, it is vital for a democratic society that society at large remains involved in decisions about regulations. And this is only possible if the medical, cultural, moral, political, legal, and social complexity and ambiguity of genetic modification on all those different layers of our society have been thought through and can be experienced from the unique perspective of all those societal layers and its practices. For this, we do not need artists who come to a solution together with scientists. but we need independent and unique and conflicting voices that invite us to think and decide for ourselves. And to me, Jacob's work is such a voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Professor. That was really inspiring and certainly raised some very, very interesting questions. I'm just wondering if we have any questions from the audience. I do have one question here. What new and emerging tremors in art do you anticipate in the near future?
That would be predicting a new technology or technological innovation. To me, genetic modification and all its ramification is already a tremor that will only continue to be a tremor in technology, in biotechnology and in the arts. But I guess that all issues around the developments in artificial intelligence will also be and are already become and are already a tremor within the arts. Issues of surveillance, of privacy, and of course the microbiome. DNA is important, but it's already old hat if you think of all the implications of research on the microbiome. The microbiome gives us so much information about who and what we are, and about our lifestyle, the region where we live, that this research on microbiome will also become, or is already, I think, a tremor in the Deleuzian sense in the medical sciences, but will also become, and is already, I know of many artists that engage with that within the artistic realm as well.
And a related question, how do you recognise what is a tremor in art and what is just a fashion?
Well, as I try to give a definition of the Deleuzian tremor. And the Deleuzian tremor to me is something that disrupts, transforms, but initially disrupts the authoritative narratives within a certain science or within the arts. And I don't think that a fashion or a trend can do that. So I of course recognize that there are artists that apply or engage in their arts with all kinds of technological developments. But as I tried to explain in the beginning of my lecture, then this is only kind of superficial engagement with those technological innovations. I think that a tremor is something that is shaking up the domain of technology and shaking up the domain of the arts. So I think I can easily say that when an artist can easily see or explain when an artist is just using biotechnological materials and media for the sake of connecting to a certain trend, or when an artist is more deeply connected to these issues. I don't want to name any artist because I don't want to offend a person, but one of the artists that Professor Gombrich showed, I think is to me anyway an artist that is not really deeply connected with the issues of biotechnology.
Okay. And how can scientists and artists overcome the prospect of collaboration possibly becoming a contest of egos?
Well, so I've been working with artists and scientists for over the past 15 or 20 years, trying to set up these collaborations. And one thing I learned, that a collaboration can only be successful and is only successful, and I've seen some successful collaboration, if the artist and the scientist connect on this very personal level and share some kind of personal, or have some kind of personal emotional relationship with each other. So in Leiden, there's a colleague of mine at the Faculty of Natural Sciences, and he worked together with a bioartist from the US. Again, I won't mention names. I see that they also kind of ethically, morally, and emotionally connected with each other. And only in that case, I think, they can overcome this ego issues. And I agree with the person that asked this question, that egos are always hindering this kind of art science collaborations, because then, of course, you see that the scientist feels that he is much more that he has much more expertise, which is of course many times true, than the artist. And the artist feels that the scientist doesn't know anything about art. So that is another requirement that I think is needed, that the artist has real understanding and a kind of expert knowledge of the sciences that he engaged with in this art science exchanges, art science collaborations. I really like the work that Professor Gombrich displays, this Jan Teeuwisse, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Thank you. To me, that is something about the tremor of indeed the tremor of a virus, something that invades your body, and how to rethink that on an artistic level. It's not an art science collaboration, of course. So I make a distinction between artists that engage with science without really collaborating with scientists, and artists that engage in an art science collaboration. So really engage with a scientist, and that often leads, anyway, not always, but often leads anyway, from my perspective, to rather poor art and point.
Okay. And how does the artistic tremor translate into the sciences, into a scientific, if you will, only via democratic political tools?
Well, the point that I'm trying to make in my lecture, perhaps not that openly discussed, is that we need that we and that was in my last quote, in my conclusion, that as a society we need all these many heterogeneous voices in order to somehow come to some kind of regulation in this field. And we need to regulate this. And we cannot leave it to only the scientist. So that means that we can only do this if science is not, as they always do, trying to seek for self-regulation, but if they acknowledge that a political, ethical debate about, for instance, in the Netherlands, the embryo law, that it should not only be an expert discussion, but that other voices that perhaps are no experts should also be involved in that.
And our last question, how do you foresee the discipline of art being changed by taking place in this debate in addressing the complexity of biotech? And how can we ensure that this change is not merely a regurgitation of scientific ideas?
Yeah, that is indeed the question. How to, and my answer again would be that we need artists with sufficient knowledge of what is going on in this case the biotechnological field, and Jacob has proven that to me. He is an expert almost on biotechnological issues, and at the same time does use this knowledge, applies this knowledge, not as a way of discussing with scientists issues of ethical or moral issues, but try to make this knowledge part of his own artistic practice with his own artistic goals. But it is a challenge. I completely agree with that, and it often leads to, as I said before, to art in which I see an artist trying to engage with these sciences, but in the end, it is just trying to engage with it. And that always means that the artistic aim is somehow left behind in this trying to connect to the sciences.
Yes, that's wonderful. And thank you very much for raising a lot of these very complex ideas. And I think it's a very important discussion that we need to enter into in this confluence of art and science. And I think that idea of emerging ideas and a new way of approaching art practice, for example, is certainly something that we need to reconsider when we're collaborating with artists and scientists.
I agree. Thank you.
So thank you very, very much for that very engaging discussion. And thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.